Number 1. The Creek. I don't really know how scary other people might find this. It's an odd and really weird experience, which really unnerved me. And it might also be a little icky too, but it was the scariest experience I have personally ever had. It was late summertime, and I would be starting my junior year of college in the fall. I decided to go on a hiking and camping trip on my own before having to get back to the dorm life. My extended family owns a large rural area with tons of hills, trees, valleys, and, well, you name it. Every so often, I decided to go out and spend some time out there camping and hiking, and even to this day, I have never been able to experience it all. My plan this year was to check out some of the areas I hadn't seen before. I knew there was a creek in a certain area away from the house. I figured if I found the creek, then I could follow it along and not get lost in the unknown area. I had 4 days worth of supplies, which would be enough to get me to and back from my unknown destination. It was still really warm outside, and thus I didn't feel a need to put up a fire on the first night. After I had my pup tent put up, I spent some time just looking at the stars. I love doing that out in the country because you see so much more of the stars than you can see anywhere else. I recognized all the constellations that I knew and just sort of let my imagination go to where it needed to go. When it got later at night, I went into my pup tent with my lantern. I read a little bit and then put out the light and tried to fall asleep. I was doing a good job drifting off, actually. I'd been walking all day, and my whole body was pretty worn out. I'm pretty sure I had dozed off when, for some reason, my head jerked involuntarily. That brought me fully awake, even though I wasn't quite sure why I had woken up so suddenly. I lay in the sleeping bag for a few moments, listening. After a few moments, I definitely then heard something. It wasn't too far off, and it sounded like there was a lot of movement. I focused in on the sound, and when I did, it sounded exactly like someone walking outside of the tent. I felt a little bit afraid. I mean, I was on my family's property, so I wasn't trespassing or anything. But if someone else was out there, as I knew for a fact that my family hadn't given anyone else permission to be there, that meant they were trespassing, and that worried me a bit. I listened as the sound went on. I was able to tell, though, that whoever or whatever was out there was moving away from me. They likely didn't know I was even out there, and I was quite okay with that. When finally the noise died down, I then was able to relax and drift off to sleep. The following day, I hadn't forgotten about what happened. I knew that it was unlikely for me to run into anyone, but I still had to be alert. As I went along, following the creek, the trespasser or trespassers went to the back of my mind. I was feeling pretty good. I kept following the creek and noticed that up ahead it went from a small riverbed to a large pond. I was excited to see that, and thought I might get to even see some fish or salamanders. So I hustled a bit and got up to the pond. I put my pack down and started walking around the pond. It was pretty big, and it was cool thinking that this had been out here for a long time, and me and probably a lot of other people didn't even know it existed. On the far side of the pond, though, I saw something floating on the surface. I kept trying to guess what it was from a distance, and just because I enjoy doing that. I really had no idea, and can't even remember what my guesses were. I was just going to have to get closer and check it out. As I got up closer to the item, I began to shake a little bit. It was only a few feet from the shore of the creek, but it looked like an arm. As I got closer and closer, I began to get scared, thinking it was exactly that. And when I finally got there, it was confirmed. It was a human arm, attached to a human body, lying in the creek. The eyes were open, but I could tell the person was dead. Their throat had been slashed open, but the worst part was that I could tell that this person was very recently killed, and very likely hadn't been in the creek for a whole day. My mind went back to the noises I heard the previous night, and I began wondering if I was hearing this guy, or possibly whoever slashed his throat. I only stood there for a few moments, feeling nervous, uneasy, and scared, and then I realized I needed to turn around and head back out of the woods. It was still early in the morning, so I could conceivably get out of the woods by nightfall. It was terrifying, and I felt like I was being watched the entire time. I heard sounds of people walking and moving in the woods, but didn't know if my mind was hearing things wrong. I just didn't know. And when it got dark, it was worse, even though I was close to home. The last hour was walking in the dark woods, and to this day, I've never been as scared as I was that night. And the police did recover the body, but to this day, no one knows who killed him. Number 2. My friend. When I was 12 years old, a boy named Scott moved into the house next door to live with his grandparents. There weren't a lot of other kids in the area, so I was ecstatic to have a new friend. And we met up, talked, and really got along great. In addition to hanging out, playing at the park, and other things, Scott also enjoyed camping sleepovers. After he had been living next door for about a month and a half, he invited me over to sleep in the tent in his backyard. I never talked to Scott before then about why he had moved in with his grandparents. I knew a few kids in school that were being raised by their grandparents, so it was not that unusual to me. I never even thought of asking him. His grandparents had a huge backyard, and his grandpa put up the tent pretty far back away from the house. He figured we would have a lot more fun if we were free to make as much noise as we wanted to, and that was pretty cool, mostly because it was like he was giving us permission to misbehave. We had a great night out there, but eventually, as the night wore on, I realized that something was bothering Scott. I asked him what it was. That was when he told me how he had come to live with his grandparents. Scott's parents were unmarried. His mom remained home with him, while his father was nearly always on the road. In fact, Scott told me that he rarely, if ever, saw his father, but a few times a year. He didn't even really know a whole lot about his father. What he did know, however, was that he cheated on his mom a lot, and then eventually it led to some major problems. The two of them got into a fight, and his father beat the holy living crap out of his mother. Fortunately, she didn't die, but she was hospitalized in a coma. His father fled, and he came to his maternal grandparents while his mom was in the hospital. It was a freaky story, especially since his dad didn't go to jail. But they lived pretty far away, and at least his mom had survived. That was our first night sleeping over. We did it at least once a week for several more weeks. It was really fun. About the fourth time we were camping out in the back, we were eating some s'mores and listening to the radio. That was when Scott suddenly turned the volume of the radio down. He furrowed his brow, and when I tried to ask him something, he shushed me. Finally, after several moments of not knowing what was happening, Scott asked me if I heard something out back. I listened. I took Scott completely seriously, as he wasn't really a fan of pranks or scary things. So I knew that if he heard something, he would be completely serious about it. But it took a while before I actually heard anything. But when I did, it certainly sounded like someone was out in the woods, behind the yard. Scott, who so recently had been terrorized by his father, was understandably upset. The lights were off in his house, but I asked him if he wanted to go in. He kept listening for a little while, and then he decided that was a good idea. We gathered some things up, and then Scott went to unzip the door to the tent. We began creeping out. As Scott was zipping the door up, we heard a voice out in the woods say, "Scotty." We broke into a run immediately. We ran toward the house and didn't look back. The back door was unlocked and we went in and locked it. I looked out the back window as Scott's grandpa walked into the room and asked what was going on. "Dad's out in the woods behind the house," Scott told him, confirming exactly what I thought was happening. His grandpa took us away from the door and he called the police. It took them a while, but they finally caught Scott's dad. He had a gun and a hunting knife on him, and we have no idea if he was wanting to hurt Scott or me that night, but it seemed like a real possibility. He went to jail, and Scott has had no contact with him since. Number 3. Followed. I had a really bad hiking and camping experience a few years back. Me and my best friend Todd were going on a week-long hiking trip. We picked an area that we were slightly familiar with. We parked our car by the side of the road and then took our things into the woods. We weren't worried about the car, really, as we had done this several times in the past. The car was always there when we returned. Our first day hiking went by without anything really happening. We camped the first night, got a great night's sleep, and then we went on our way the following day. For a while, on the second day, things were normal. But as it got later in the evening, Todd began to get a little bit distracted. He kept asking me if I heard someone walking in the woods with us, and for the longest time I did not. But when it got later in the evening, I began to believe that I was, in fact, hearing someone else out in the woods. I knew it was likely nothing, and it was even possible that my mind was playing tricks on me. But it seemed like there was someone else out there. That night, while we were in the tent, I didn't really hear anything for the longest time. But in the morning, Todd seemed very uneasy. When I asked him what was wrong, he had told me that he was confident that he heard some people talking outside our tent the last night. He couldn't make out exactly what was being said, but he heard two voices talking to each other a little bit away from the tent. Well, that did very little to make me feel good, I'll tell you. I wasn't really that much on edge because of what had happened the previous day. Up until that point, I really wasn't sure that I really had heard anything. But if Todd was hearing voices of people talking, then that was a serious issue. I mean, I know your mind can play tricks on you when it's really quiet outside, but to hear two distinct voices, that seemed like it was just more than a trick of the mind. However, Todd didn't want to turn back or anything, so we just continued on our hike. I have to admit, we were a bit on edge that day of hiking. However, we didn't really have any abnormal experience during the day. That night went by without incident as well, so I began to think that either we were imagining things, or if there were other hikers out there, they weren't following us or anything. The fourth night, I was awoken in my sleep by a noise. I wasn't sure what it was, but I could hear a pounding sound. Almost sounded like someone hitting a nail into a piece of wood. I almost woke Todd up, but then I decided that might not be the best idea. No reason to scare him if there was nothing major going on. The noise died down after a while, and then it was quiet. I was drifting back off to sleep when it was such a strange noise, and something I hadn't heard before. It went on for about 10 minutes, and then it abruptly stopped. After that, it was quiet for the rest of the night. It took me a while, but I eventually fell back asleep. Todd woke up before I did. I heard him yell, "Holy shit!" and that woke me up, and I quickly pulled myself out of the tent. I immediately noticed what Todd had seen. 4 loons were laying in front of the tent, bloody and with their eyes ripped out. They were lying neatly beside each other, indicating that someone had put them there. It was too scary, and we felt that we were in major danger. So we packed up and headed out. It took us nearly 2 full days to get out of the woods and back to our car. We weren't sleeping much, so we spent a lot of extra time hustling. But when we got to our car, we were in for another surprise. Scrawled on the side of our car what we assumed was Loon blood was written, "Don't come back." We got in the car and left. We never went back. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I'm starting to get back in the groove of things. Thank you all for the wonderful comments and well wishes you have given me. I'm definitely not caught up on all my correspondence, so please don't think I'm ignoring you if I haven't answered you yet. In the meantime, if you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button below and the bell, or click on the picture of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. There is a link to the Killer Orange Cat subreddit in the description where you can read print versions of these stories, submit your own stories, or just interact. Please comment and share with someone you think will enjoy this. And please, never forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.